The notification light on Liam's phone pulsed with a soft, insidious rhythm, a tiny star of malevolence in the dim light of his study. He had propped the burner phone, his secret window into another world, against a stack of architectural journals. On its screen was the latest message in a group chat titled, Preston Family Circle. It was from his brother-in-law, Marcus. The message was a photo, a picture of Liam taken covertly earlier that day, his face etched with a carefully constructed mask of worry. Above it, Marcus had written, "Our dear architect contemplating his new career as a barista. Should we tip him in advance?" A cascade of laughing emojis from his mother-in-law, Eleanor, and a single, brutal, thumbs-up icon from his father-in-law, Richard, followed immediately. Liam watched the screen, his own face a placid lake, betraying none of the cold, precise calculations happening beneath the surface. He felt a familiar, chilling stillness settle over him. They thought he was broken. They thought his firm had collapsed, that his ambition had crumbled into dust, leaving him a pitiable failure clinging to the coattails of their daughter, his wife, Chloe. They didn't know this failure was a fabrication. They didn't know his collapse was a meticulously designed demolition, clearing the ground for a structure they couldn't even imagine. And they certainly didn't know that within 7 days, at their annual lavish garden party, the entire foundation of their arrogant world would be systematically dismantled by the very man they were mocking. If you've ever felt underestimated, if you've ever been judged by people who couldn't see your true worth, then this story is for you. I'm glad you're here with us today. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you enjoy what you see, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Now, let's watch what happens when patience runs out. The charade had begun 2 weeks prior, on a Tuesday evening that smelled of rain and Chloe's expensive freesia-scented candles. Liam had walked into their minimalist, white-walled living room, a space Chloe and her mother had decorated with an eye for fashionable sterility. He had loosened his tie, a gesture he'd practiced in the car to look authentic, and sank into the plush sofa, letting his shoulders slump. Chloe looked up from her tablet, her brow furrowed with mild annoyance at the interruption. "Liam, you're home early." "We need to talk," he said, his voice a carefully calibrated instrument of defeat. He ran a hand through his hair, another rehearsed gesture. He'd spent years as an architect, a profession that was 90% planning and 10% execution. He had applied the same principles to this moment. Every detail, every pause, every flicker of his eyes had been blueprinted. Chloe set her tablet aside, her expression shifting from impatience to a cautious concern that was more about self-preservation than empathy. "What is it? You look awful." "It's the firm," he began, letting the sentence hang in the air. "The Sterling Tower project. The financing fell through. Completely. The investors pulled out this morning." This was the cornerstone of his lie. The Sterling Tower project was real, but it was a small, secondary venture he had intentionally over-leveraged and under-supported, a sacrificial lamb. His true masterpiece, the colossal Phoenix project, remained a closely guarded secret, thriving in the shadows. "They just pulled out?" Chloe asked, the practical implications already dawning on her. "But that was your biggest contract. What does that mean for the firm?" Liam looked at his hands, then back at her, letting the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. "It means the firm is gone, Chloe. It's over. I've spent the whole day in meetings with lawyers, with the bank. We're insolvent. I have to declare bankruptcy." The word landed in the pristine room like a block of wet concrete. Bankruptcy. It was the ultimate sin in the Preston family's theology of wealth. Chloe's face went pale. It wasn't the pallor of shared grief, but the stark white of personal horror. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, weren't looking at a husband in pain. They were looking at a liability, a sudden, ugly stain on the perfect fabric of her life. "Bankrupt?" she whispered, the word foreign and foul in her mouth. Liam, my parents, what will I tell them? That was her first question. Not, are you okay? Not, how can we get through this? But what will I tell them? In that moment, Liam knew his experiment, as painful as it was necessary. He had loved Chloe, or at least the woman he thought she was. But over the years, her family's insidious values, that a person's worth was a direct reflection of their net worth, had seeped into her, eroding the kind, supportive woman he had married. I don't know, he answered, his voice a hollow echo of her shock. He needed her to believe it, to carry this story back to her family with the unvarnished terror of a true believer. She stood up and began pacing, her movements sharp and agitated. My father warned me. He said your field was too volatile. He said you were taking on too much risk. The "I told you so" was already forming, cloaked in the guise of her father's supposed wisdom. I thought I could handle it, Liam said, playing the part of the humbled fool. She stopped pacing and looked at him, her eyes narrowing. So, what now? What do we do? We have the mortgage, the cars, my membership at the club. The list of assets, of appearances, was already being tallied. Liam felt a profound sadness, a grief for the marriage that had clearly died long before this staged financial collapse. He reached into his jacket pocket, his fingers brushing against the cool, smooth barrel of his Lamy 2000 pen. It was a masterpiece of German engineering, simple, elegant, brutally efficient. It was the pen he had used to sign the final contracts for the Phoenix project, a deal worth more than Richard Preston's entire portfolio. The pen was his secret anchor to reality, a symbolic object reminding him of the power he held in reserve. We'll have to downsize, he said softly. Sell the house, sell my car. We'll have to be careful. Chloe stared at him, her expression hardening from shock into a cold, quiet fury. Sell the house? She repeated, as if he had suggested they live in a cave. Liam, I will not be humiliated like this. And there it was. Not we, I. The battle lines were drawn. For the next 2 weeks, Liam would endure the full force of that humiliation. He would be tested, prodded, and mocked. And all the while, he would be watching, listening, and adding to the list of grievances he kept in a small, leather-bound notebook, a ledger of disrespect that would soon be paid in full. The next family dinner was in 3 days. He knew it would be the first trial by fire. The air in the Preston dining room was thick with the scent of roasted duck and condescension. It was a vast, cavernous space, dominated by a mahogany table that could comfortably seat 20. Tonight, there were only 5. Richard and Eleanor at either end, like monarchs holding court. Their son, Marcus, lounging in his chair with an air of bored entitlement. Chloe, tense and silent, and Liam, placed pointedly in the middle, the guest of dishonor at his own public inquest. The crystal glasses gleamed under the recessed lighting, and the silverware was so heavy it felt like a weapon. Every element of the room was designed to communicate wealth, permanence, and power. A power Liam had apparently just lost. For the first 20 minutes, the conversation was a masterclass in passive aggression. Richard spoke at length about a friend's son who had, wisely, gone into investment banking. Eleanor recounted a story about a distant cousin whose unfortunate business venture had led to social ruin. No one looked at Liam directly, yet every word was a carefully aimed dart. Liam ate his duck, his movements calm and deliberate. He could feel Chloe's anxiety radiating from across the table. She wanted him to say something, to defend himself, but she also wanted him to disappear. Her conflict was a palpable thing, a silent storm in the space between them. Marcus, never one for subtlety, was the first to break the unspoken rule. He leaned forward, swirling the wine in his glass, a smirk playing on his lips. So, Liam, he began, his tone dripping with faux sympathy. Heard things went a bit pear-shaped at the old drawing board. Tough break. Liam met his gaze, his expression unreadable. "It's a difficult market, Marcus." "Difficult market?" Richard boomed from the head of the table, finally addressing Liam directly. He put down his fork with a decisive clink. "Nonsense. A good captain can navigate any storm. A poor one sinks the ship. It's as simple as that." He was a man built of broad pronouncements and unshakable self-belief, his face florid from years of fine wine and easy victories. He saw the world as a simple equation of winners and losers, and he had just recategorized his son-in-law. "Perhaps you're right, Richard," Liam said, his voice even. This was the strategy. Agree, absorb, and reflect. Never argue. Never show anger. Let their arrogance be the fuel for their own undoing. Eleanor chimed in, her voice a high, brittle whisper. "Well, the important thing is that Chloe is taken care of. She's a Preston, after all. We won't let her suffer for mistakes." The final word was delivered with a delicate flick of her wrist, as if she were shooing away a fly. The implication was clear. Liam was the mistake. Chloe flinched, a small, almost imperceptible movement. She looked down at her plate, her blonde hair falling like a curtain to hide her face. She said nothing. Her silence was a betrayal, sharper than any of their insults. In that moment, Liam's resolve hardened into something akin to tempered steel. This was no longer just about teaching them a lesson in humility. It was about exposing the rot at the core of their family, a rot his wife had become complicit in protecting. "Of course," Liam replied, directing his words to Eleanor but keeping his eyes on Chloe. "Chloe's well-being is my primary concern." Marcus laughed, a short, ugly bark. "Good luck with that, mate. What are you going to do anyway? I hear Starbucks is hiring. You're good at taking complicated orders, right?" He looked to his father for approval, and Richard gave a slight, indulgent nod. This was the moment, the first true test of his composure. The insult was direct, crude, and designed to emasculate. Liam felt a hot surge of anger, but he forced it down, channeling it into a cold, crystalline focus. He thought of the Phoenix Project, a sprawling, eco-conscious urban development that was already being hailed in private circles as revolutionary. He thought of the call he'd had that morning with David Chen, his partner, where they'd confirmed the final anchor tenant, a global tech giant. The sheer scale of that success was a shield, rendering Marcus's petty taunts meaningless. He gave Marcus a slow, patient smile. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and it seemed to unnerve his brother-in-law more than any angry retort would have. "That's an idea, Marcus. I'll keep it in mind. But for now, I think I'll focus on managing the transition." "Transition?" Richard scoffed. "The transition from the penthouse to the outhouse? I've seen it 100 times. Men who fly too close to the sun. Your ambition outstripped your talent, son. It's a classic story." Liam picked up his water glass. He took a slow sip, the silence stretching. He was building a new structure in this room, a structure of unbearable tension. He was the architect of this moment, too. "You're probably right," he said again, setting the glass down with a soft click. "Ambition can be a dangerous thing if it's not built on a solid foundation." He let his eyes drift around the table, meeting each of their gazes in turn. He looked at Marcus's smug face, Eleanor's disdainful pout, Richard's booming certainty, and finally he looked at Chloe. She was staring at him now, her eyes pleading. Pleading for what? For him to fight back? For him to capitulate? For him to simply make it all stop? She didn't know what she wanted, and that was the heart of the problem. The rest of the dinner passed in a similar vein. They offered him condescending advice. They suggested menial jobs he could take. Richard even offered to have a word with the manager of his golf club to see if there was an opening for a locker room attendant. Through it all, Liam maintained his serene, almost unnerving calm. He was a rock against which their waves of contempt crashed and broke. He was gathering data, recording every slight, every dismissive gesture. Later that night, back in his study, He would open his secret phone and see the dinner recapped in the Preston family circle. Marcus. He just sat there and took it. Absolutely pathetic. Eleanor. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Chloe looked mortified. Poor girl. Richard. He has no spine. I told you, Chloe, the man has no backbone. You can't build an empire on jelly. Liam read the messages and he felt nothing but a profound, almost peaceful clarity. They were so sure of their world, so blind to anything that existed outside their narrow definitions of success and failure. They were building his case for him, brick by condescending brick. He opened his leather notebook and with his Lamy 2000 made a new entry under the heading, Family Dinner. He wrote down Richard's line about a poor captain sinking the ship. He wrote down Eleanor's comment about him being a mistake. And he wrote down Marcus's offer of a job at Starbucks. Each one was a debt that would soon be called in. The days following the dinner bled into a week of escalating humiliations. The Prestons, emboldened by Liam's passivity, seemed to have made it their personal mission to grind him under their heel. It was no longer about passive aggression. It was about active, deliberate debasement. Chloe, caught between her family's cruelty and her husband's baffling inaction, retreated further into a fortress of resentful silence. She had moved into the guest room, claiming she needed space to think. The space she created was a chasm. On Wednesday, Marcus called him at 8 in the morning. Liam, pal, he said, his voice offensively cheerful. Got a bit of a situation. My car's in the shop, and I need a lift to a meeting across town. Be a good chap and pick me up in an hour, will you? It wasn't a request. Liam, playing his role, agreed without hesitation. When he arrived at Marcus's sleek downtown condo in his own modest sedan, the one he'd kept while Chloe drove the family's luxury SUV, Marcus made him wait in the lobby for 20 minutes. He finally sauntered out, holding 2 coffees. He handed one to Liam. Here, Marcus said, not making eye contact as he scrolled to his phone. Figured you could use the practice. Liam took the coffee. He didn't drink it. He simply held it as he drove, the cheap cardboard cup a small, potent symbol of his current station. The entire drive, Marcus was on the phone, talking loudly about deals, about acquisitions, about his own soaring success. He spoke of synergy and leveraging assets, corporate jargon that in his mouth sounded less like business acumen and more like an insecure mating call. He didn't speak a single word to Liam directly. When they arrived at the gleaming office tower, Marcus hopped out. Just wait here, he commanded. This should take about an hour. Don't wander off. Liam waited. He sat in the driver's seat in the parking garage, the engine off, the silence broken only by the hum of the fluorescent lights. He pulled out his secret phone. The group chat was already active. It was Chloe this time. Chloe. Is it true you made Liam drive you to a meeting? Marcus. Of course. What else is he doing? Besides, it's good for him. Builds character. Or whatever he has left of it. Eleanor. Honestly, Chloe, you should be grateful. At least Marcus is giving him something to do. It's better than him moping around the house all day, reminding you of the situation. Chloe's reply was a long time coming. Liam watched the 3 dots appear and disappear, a visual representation of her wavering resolve. Finally, a message appeared. Chloe. I guess. 2 words. The final surrender. Any lingering hope Liam had that she might stand up for him, even in private, dissolved. He felt a cold grief, but also a liberating sense of finality. He was no longer trying to save his marriage. He was now simply executing a plan. He put the phone away and pulled out his leather notebook and the Lamy pen. The pen felt solid and real in his hand, a conduit to his true self. He wrote, chauffeur, told to wait, builds character. The next day it was Eleanor. She was hosting a charity luncheon at the family estate. She called Liam with a list of tasks. Liam, darling, she cooed, her voice like spun glass laced with arsenic. Since you have so much time on your hands, I was hoping you could help out. The caterers need someone to help with the heavy lifting, setting up tables, carrying boxes, and the valet company is short-staffed. You know how to drive, don't you? He arrived at the sprawling Preston estate to find chaos. He spent the morning hauling tables and chairs across the manicured lawns under the disdainful eye of the catering manager, who Eleanor had clearly briefed on Liam's situation. He was treated not as a family member, but as hired help who had forgotten to come in through the service entrance. Later, wearing a black vest the valet captain had tossed him, he parked cars. He parked the Mercedes of a man he had outbid on a zoning variance 6 months ago. He parked the BMW of a banker who had been desperately trying to get a meeting with him about the Phoenix project. Each interaction was a small, surreal scene in a play only he understood. The men handed him their keys, their eyes filled with a flicker of pity or confusion. "Tough break, old man," one of them muttered, pressing a $5 bill into his hand. Liam pocketed it without a word. Chloe was there, of course. She drifted through the party in a pale yellow dress, a ghost at her own mother's feast. She saw him. He saw her see him. Their eyes met for a brief, agonizing moment over the hood of a gleaming Bentley. He saw shame in her eyes. Not shame for her family's behavior, but shame for being associated with him, the valet. She turned away, a blush creeping up her neck, and laughed at something one of her friends said. That evening, the group chat was a festival of cruelty. Marcus: "Just heard from Mom. Liam the valet was a huge hit. Said he didn't scratch a single car. Maybe he's found his calling." Richard: "It's about finding your level. He's found his. There's no shame in honest work, I suppose." The feigned magnanimity was the most insulting part. Eleanor: "The important thing is he was useful, and it kept him out of sight. A few people asked Chloe about him, but she handled it beautifully. Just said he was helping out." Liam read the messages, his face illuminated by the phone's glow. He felt strangely detached, like a surgeon observing a disease. Their blindness was absolute. They were so cocooned in their wealth and status that they couldn't conceive of a reality different from the one they had constructed. They saw a failed architect, a man to be pitied and used. They couldn't see the strategist, the patient predator who was letting them walk deeper and deeper into a trap of their own making. He closed the phone, the rage now a low pilot light of purpose inside him. The annual garden party was in 5 days. The final act was approaching. He picked up his pen and turned to a fresh page in his notebook. At the top he wrote, "The garden party," and began to outline the conversation that would change everything. The call came on a Thursday afternoon, exactly 1 week before the Prestons' annual garden party. Liam was in his study, the room that had become his sanctuary and command center. On his desk, blueprints for a small, elegant lakeside cabin were spread out. A personal project, a place he imagined he might retreat to when this was all over. He was sketching a detail for a window joint when his secure line, the one only a handful of people had the number for, began to ring. It was David Chen, his partner and the pragmatic, brilliant engineer who had helped him bring the Phoenix project to life. "Liam," David's voice was crisp, efficient, but underlined with a current of excitement. "I'm looking at the final renderings for the Central Plaza. They're breathtaking. You've outdone yourself." Liam leaned back in his chair, a genuine smile touching his lips for the first time in days. Talking to David was like breathing clean air after being trapped in a smoke-filled room. "It's all about the flow, Dave. The way the light hits the water feature at midday. It has to feel like a public space, not a corporate one." "It does," David affirmed, "but that's not why I'm calling. Are you sitting down?" "I am," Liam said, his smile fading into focused attention. "The board at Omnicorp just voted, unanimously. They're taking the entire North Tower, all 30 floors, and they've agreed to our escalators on the lease terms. We didn't have to give an inch." There was a pause, and Liam could almost hear the grin in David's voice. "And get this, their lead negotiator mentioned that Richard Preston's firm was one of the consultants they fired last quarter for lack of vision. His words. Liam closed his eyes. The irony was so thick, so poetically just, it was almost overwhelming. Richard Preston, the man who had called him talentless, had been dismissed for a lack of vision from a project that would now be directly enriching the man he scorned. The architecture of his plan was revealing its own perfect, brutal symmetry. That's interesting, David. Thank you for telling me. Interesting? Liam, it's monumental. This solidifies the project's profitability for the next 2 decades. The press release is scheduled for next Friday. It's going to be the biggest real estate story of the year. Our sacrificial lamb, the Sterling Tower default, will be a footnote, exactly as we planned. A brilliant, brilliant move, by the way. Our competitors are still scrambling, thinking the market's softer than it is. Good, Liam said, his voice quiet. Let them scramble. He looked at the burner phone sitting on the corner of his desk. It was silent for now, but he knew the Preston family circle would be buzzing later with gossip and petty triumphs. The contrast was staggering. In their world, they were celebrating his demotion to a valet. In the real world, he and David were quietly reshaping a city skyline. So, are we done with this little masquerade of yours? David asked, a note of concern in his voice. I get the strategy, Liam, I do. But listening to you play the part of a pauper is getting old. When do you get to drop the hammer? Liam picked up his Lamy pen, rolling its cool, matte barrel between his fingers. Soon, very soon. There's a party next Thursday. The timing of your press release is perfect. Let's move it up. Can you have it ready to go live at, say, 7 p.m. next Thursday? There was a moment of silence on the other end. 7 p.m. on a Thursday? That's an odd time for a major financial announcement. It's a very specific time, Liam said. And David, I need you to do something else for me. I need you to be at that party. He gave him the address of the Preston estate. You want me to crash your in-laws' party? David sounded amused. Not crash, arrive. At precisely 7:15. Bring a copy of the finalized Omnicorp contract and wear your best suit. I have a feeling my father-in-law will want to see you. David chuckled, the sound rich with understanding. Ah, it's a performance. I see. Consider it done. I wouldn't miss this for the world. Just tell me one thing. Is she worth it? The question hung in the air. Was Chloe worth it? A week ago, he might have said yes. He might have held on to the hope that this shock to her system would reawaken the woman he fell in love with. But after the silence, the complicity, the mortified glance at the luncheon, he knew the answer. This isn't about her anymore, David, Liam said, his voice devoid of emotion. It's about integrity, mine and theirs. It's about reminding them that a man's worth isn't measured by his bank balance, but by his character. And sometimes you have to tear down the old structure to see what it was really made of. Poetic, David said. All right, architect, I'll see you at 7:15 next Thursday. Try not to get assigned to parking my car. They hung up and Liam sat in the silence of his study. He felt a profound sense of calm, the quiet focus that always preceded the final, intense phase of a major project. He had the plans. He had the materials. He had the timeline. All that was left was the execution. Later that evening, the invitation arrived. It wasn't handed to him by Chloe. It was left on the kitchen counter, a thick, cream-colored card in an unsealed envelope. He was an afterthought. The card announced the Prestons' annual midsummer garden party with flamboyant calligraphy. At the bottom, in Chloe's elegant script, was a small note. Mom says you should probably wear a dark suit to blend in. Blend in, disappear, be a shadow in the background of their glorious life. Liam picked up the card, a faint, cold smile on his face. He wouldn't blend in. He would be the single, unignorable focal point. He would be the wrecking ball dressed in a dark suit. He went back to his study, opened his leather notebook to the page marked The Garden Party, and under the heading Key Participants, he wrote, David Chen, 7:15 p.m. Below that, he wrote, Omnicorp contract. The quiet before the storm had begun. The air itself seemed to be holding its breath. The day of the garden party arrived wrapped in a perfect, mocking blue sky. The Preston estate was a stage, meticulously set. White tents billowed on the vast green lawn. Strings of fairy lights were woven through the branches of ancient oak trees, and a string quartet played Vivaldi with polite precision. The air smelled of cut grass, expensive perfume, and impending judgment. Liam stood for a moment in the grand foyer of the house, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark gray suit, not black, as Chloe had suggested, but a shade that was both elegant and assertive. He adjusted his tie, his movements unhurried. He could feel the familiar thrum of performance anxiety, the same feeling he got just before a major client presentation. It wasn't fear, it was focus. Chloe found him there. She was wearing a flowing, seafoam green dress, and she looked ethereal and deeply unhappy. "You're ready," she said. It wasn't a question. "Try to have a good time." The words were empty, a social nicety that had no connection to their reality. "I intend to," Liam replied, his voice calm. He met her eyes, and for a second, he saw a flicker of the woman she used to be. A brief flash of worry for him, not for herself. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a guarded tension. "Dad's in a mood," she warned him quietly. "One of his investment partners dropped him last week, and he's been trying to get a foothold in the new downtown development sector, but he says it's like a fortress. He's looking for someone to blame." "I'm sure he'll find someone," Liam said, the dramatic irony of her statement hanging between them. Her father was being shut out of a fortress Liam himself had built. They walked out onto the terrace together, a tableau of a happy couple for the assembled guests. Immediately, the performance began. People greeted Chloe warmly, then their eyes would slide over to Liam, their smiles tightening, their expressions shifting to one of pity or mild disdain. The news of his failure had clearly made the rounds. He was a social leper. He endured the handshakes that were held a second too short, the pats on the back that felt more like blows. He saw Richard holding court near the bar, his voice booming over the string quartet. He saw Eleanor flitting between groups of friends, her laughter like the tinkling of ice in an empty glass. He saw Marcus, surrounded by a group of sycophantic young men, pointing discreetly in Liam's direction, a cruel grin on his face. Liam simply nodded, smiled his serene, unnerving smile, and accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter. He was a ghost, haunting the edges of their celebration. He checked his watch, 6:45 p.m. He made his way through the crowd, a slow, deliberate path that took him past each member of the family. He passed Eleanor, who was telling a friend, "It's been so hard on Chloe, but she's being incredibly brave." He passed Marcus, who loudly said to his friends, "See, I told you, he cleans up okay for an unemployed guy." And finally, he positioned himself near the bar, within earshot of Richard. At precisely 7 p.m., Richard clinked a spoon against his champagne flute, calling for attention. The chatter died down, and all eyes turned to the patriarch. "Friends, family," he began, his chest puffed out. "Welcome. It's wonderful to see you all here celebrating another year well, of success." He paused for effect, his eyes sweeping the crowd. "In business as in life, there are ups and downs. Tides go in, tides go out. The strong swim, the weak are swept away. It takes vision, resilience, and a solid foundation to weather the storms." His gaze landed, as Liam knew it would, on him. It was a look of profound, patronizing pity. "We've all faced challenges. Some of us," he continued, his voice softening into a tone of mock sincerity, "are facing them right now. And in these moments, family is what matters. That's why we're here to support each other." He raised his glass. "To family, and to knowing when to cut your losses and build something stronger." The toast was a public execution. It was aimed at Liam, a final, definitive statement of his failure and their magnanimity. A murmur of sympathy for the Prestons rippled through the crowd. Chloe looked at the ground, her shoulders hunched. Liam let the applause die down. He let the moment settle. The string quartet began to play again. Then in the lull, he took a single step forward. His voice wasn't loud, but it was clear, cutting through the renewed chatter like a surgeon's scalpel. "That's a beautiful sentiment, Richard." All motion stopped. The quartet faltered, a violin squeaking into silence. Every head turned towards him. He had broken the unspoken rule. The ghost was speaking. Richard stared at him, his jovial mask slipping into one of irritated surprise. "Liam, do you have something to say?" "I do," Liam said, his voice gaining strength. He took another step towards the center of the terrace. He felt 100 pairs of eyes on him, but his focus was entirely on the three faces of the Preston family. "I was just reflecting on your words. Vision, resilience, and a solid foundation. You're absolutely right. They are the keys to success." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. He had their complete, undivided attention. "You also mentioned knowing when to cut your losses. That's an important lesson too, perhaps the most important of all." He turned his head slightly, his eyes finding Chloe in the crowd. "Isn't that right, Chloe?" She looked stunned, a deer caught in the headlights of a confrontation she had spent 2 weeks desperately avoiding. "Liam, what are you doing?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm building something," he said softly, then raised his voice again to address Richard. "For the past 2 weeks, I've been the subject of a great deal of speculation and advice. Marcus was kind enough to suggest a career in food service. Eleanor saw my potential in manual labor and hospitality. And you, Richard, you offered me the wisdom of a man who believes he's never made a misstep." Richard's face was darkening, his folksy charm evaporating to reveal the cold arrogance beneath. "Get to your point, son. You're making a scene." "Am I?" Liam's smile was gone, replaced by an expression of cold, hard clarity. "My point is about foundations. You see, I believe you should test a foundation before you build on it. So 2 weeks ago, I created a controlled demolition, a fiction. I told Chloe my firm was bankrupt." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Chloe's face crumpled in disbelief and dawning horror. You lied?" "I created a test," Liam corrected her, his voice sharp. "A test of loyalty, of character, of love. A test you all failed, spectacularly." He reached into his jacket pocket, not for his pen, but for the burner phone. He held it up. "I know because you documented your failure for me, right here, in the Preston family circle." The hammer had fallen. The quiet before the storm was over. The storm had just begun. The silence that followed Liam's announcement was absolute, a void so profound it seemed to suck the very air from the manicured gardens. The string quartet looked frozen in time, bows hovering over strings. Guests stood like statues, champagne flutes held midway to their lips. The world of the Preston family had ground to a halt. All eyes were on Liam, then on the horrified faces of Richard, Eleanor, and Marcus, and on Chloe, who looked as if the ground had just dissolved beneath her feet. "What is the meaning of this?" Richard finally roared, his face a mottled purple. The mask of the benevolent patriarch was gone, replaced by the raw fury of a king challenged in his own court. "What nonsense are you talking about? A test? A group chat? You're delusional." "Am I?" Liam's voice remained unnervingly calm. He unlocked the burner phone, the screen casting a pale light on his determined face. "Let's see. On Tuesday the 9th, after I told Chloe my life's work was in ruins, Marcus posted a photo of me. The caption read, 'Our dear architect contemplating his new career as a barista.' Is that delusional, Marcus?" Marcus blanched, his smug confidence vanishing like a puff of smoke. He looked wildly from Liam to his father. It was a joke. A joke, Liam repeated, his voice flat. Of course. And Eleanor, your reply, a string of laughing emojis. Was that also a joke? Was it funny to you that the man your daughter married was, as far as you knew, facing financial ruin? Eleanor clutched at her pearls, her face a mask of indignation. How dare you? How did you get that? That's a private conversation. There's nothing private about cruelty, Liam shot back, his voice hardening. And Richard, your contribution was a simple thumbs up. The seal of approval from the head of the family. A silent, damning confirmation of your contempt. He scrolled down the screen. Or perhaps we should discuss the dinner. The night you told me a poor captain sinks the ship. That same night you wrote in your family chat, and I quote, "The man has no backbone. You can't build an empire on jelly." Is that your expert assessment, Richard? Based on the difficult market? He didn't wait for an answer. He turned his attention back to the crowd, his voice resonating with a power no one there had ever heard from him. For 2 weeks, I have lived inside their assessment of me. I drove my brother-in-law to his meetings, where he left me waiting in the car like a chauffeur. I hauled tables and parked cars at my mother-in-law's luncheon, where I was treated like the hired help. And not once did my wife Chloe say a single word in my defense. He finally looked at Chloe, his eyes filled not with anger, but with a deep, profound disappointment that was far more devastating. You saw me parking cars, Chloe, and you turned away. You told your mother I was helping out. You told Marcus, I guess it was good for me to be his driver. You chose their pride over our partnership. You chose their wealth over my dignity. Tears were streaming down Chloe's face now. Liam, I didn't know what to do, she stammered. I was scared. Embarrassed. You were embarrassed, he repeated slowly, letting the weight of her confession settle. That is the most honest thing you've said in 2 weeks. He checked his watch. 7:15 p.m. As if on cue, a new figure appeared at the edge of the terrace. A man in a sharp, impeccably tailored suit carrying a leather briefcase. He moved with an air of quiet confidence, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found Liam. It was David Chen. Ah, Liam said, a slight smile returning to his face. Right on time. Richard stared at the newcomer, his brow furrowed in confusion. Who is this? What's going on? David walked calmly through the parted crowd and stopped beside Liam. He nodded once. Liam, then he turned to face Richard Preston. Mr. Preston, my name is David Chen. I'm Liam's business partner. Richard's eyes widened slightly. Partner? I thought his firm was... His old firm, yes, David said smoothly. The one he dissolved. A minor subsidiary. A calculated business expense. Liam and I are partners in a slightly larger venture. A development company you may have heard of. We call it the Phoenix Project. The name landed in the crowd like a thunderclap. The Phoenix Project was the talk of the city, a massive, mysterious downtown redevelopment that had appeared out of nowhere with seemingly limitless funding and an audacious vision. Everyone in this circle, bankers, investors, lawyers, knew of it. They had all been trying to get a piece of it. Richard Preston looked as if he had been physically struck. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. That's impossible, Marcus sputtered. You're nobody. Liam ignored him. Richard, he said, his voice now carrying the authority he had held in reserve for so long. My wife mentioned you were having trouble getting a foothold in the downtown development sector, that it was like a fortress. She was right. I designed it that way. David Chen opened his briefcase. He took out a thick, bound document and handed it to Liam. The Omnicorp contract, David said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Sign this afternoon. Liam held up the document. Omnicorp, our new anchor tenant. They're leasing the entire north tower of the Phoenix Plaza. The press release just went live about 15 minutes ago. You can all check your phones if you like. He saw the blue glow of screens appearing throughout the crowd as guests scrambled to confirm the news. They were particularly impressed with our vision, Richard. In fact, I believe they mentioned that your consulting firm was let go from their advisory board last quarter for a lack of it. The parallel structure was complete. The insult had been returned, not as a petty taunt, but as a statement of indisputable fact. Richard staggered back a step, his face ashen. He looked at Liam, then at the contract, then back at Liam, his mind struggling to reconcile the valet he had pitied with the titan of industry standing before him. So, you see, Liam concluded, his voice resonating with the quiet power of absolute victory, my foundation was never in jeopardy. It is solid, it is resilient, and it is built on a vision you are incapable of seeing. I just wanted to test the foundation of my marriage. I wanted to see what it was really made of. He looked at Chloe, his eyes now cold, and I discovered it was made of the same cheap, hollow material as the rest of your family's values. It's built on sand, and the tide, as you so wisely said, Richard, has just gone out. He dropped the burner phone onto a nearby table. It landed with a sharp, final crack. Consider this my notice. I'm cutting my losses. The stunned silence on the terrace finally broke, shattering into a cacophony of frantic whispers. Guests huddled together, their faces a mixture of shock, awe, and a dawning, delicious sense of scandal. They looked from the pale, trembling Prestons to the composed, powerful figure of Liam, and the narrative of the evening, of the past 2 weeks, was violently rewritten. The failed son-in-law was not a failure at all. He was a king who had been moving his chess pieces while everyone else was playing checkers. Richard Preston was the first to find his voice, but it was a reedy, desperate version of his usual boom. Liam, son, wait, he stammered, taking a clumsy step forward. This is a misunderstanding, a practical joke, right? A bit extreme, but I get it. You were teaching us a lesson. Liam looked at him, his expression one of weary contempt. There is no misunderstanding, Richard. You made your position perfectly clear. You said I had no backbone, that I was jelly. You offered me a job as a locker room attendant. Was that part of the lesson? Richard's face flushed with a fresh wave of humiliation. He was being confronted with his own words in front of his peers, the very people whose respect he cultivated like a prize-winning rose. I was trying to motivate you. Motivate me? Liam let out a short, humorless laugh. By humiliating me? By mocking my perceived failure to your friends and family? No, Richard, you weren't motivating me. You were kicking a man you thought was down. It is the truest measure of your character. Eleanor, her face a mess of running mascara and disbelief, rushed to her husband's side. But Chloe, she pleaded, her voice shrill. Think of Chloe. You can't do this to her. She's your wife. She was my wife, Liam corrected her, his voice like ice. A wife supports her husband. She defends him. She doesn't stand by silently while her family treats him like a servant. She doesn't turn away in shame when she sees him. She made her choice. She chose your world, your values, your approval, and now she can have them. He finally turned to Chloe, who was being held up by one of her friends, sobbing uncontrollably. Her face was a portrait of utter devastation. She had lost everything in a single, brutal moment of revelation, and she was only just beginning to understand the scale of her miscalculation. You were embarrassed by me, Chloe, Liam said, his voice softening slightly, but with no warmth in it. Well, I'm embarrassed for you. I'm embarrassed that the woman I promised to build a life with could not see beyond the surface, beyond the money, beyond what her parents thought. I truly hope their approval is enough to keep you warm at night, because it's all you have left of us. Marcus, who had been hiding behind a large potted fern, finally found a scrap of his old arrogance. You think you can just walk away? He sneered, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. You think you're better than us? Liam turned to him, and the full force of his controlled fury was unleashed in a single, quiet statement. Better? No, Marcus. I don't think I'm better. I know I am. Because my success is built on creativity, hard work, and vision. Yours is inherited. My power is earned. Yours is borrowed from your father. You are a pale imitation of a powerful man, and you spend your life mocking those you feel are beneath you because you are terrified of discovering you are one of them. He paused, letting the words sink in. And for the record, I would rather be a barista, an honest man serving coffee, than be you. The insult was so precise, so surgically delivered, that Marcus physically recoiled as if he'd been slapped. He had no response. Liam turned to David Chen, who had been watching the entire exchange with a look of grim satisfaction. David, thank you for coming. I think our work here is done. My pleasure, Liam, David said, clapping him on the shoulder. He cast a final, dismissive glance at the crumbling Preston family. It's been educational. As Liam and David began to walk away, a path parting before them as if they were royalty, Chloe finally broke free from her friends. Liam, wait! She cried, running after him, her beautiful dress now looking like a costume for a tragedy. She grabbed his arm. Please, don't go. We can fix this. I love you. I was wrong. I was so wrong. Liam stopped. He looked down at her hand on his arm, then back up at her tear-streaked face. For a moment, the crowd held its breath, wondering if there was a chance for reconciliation. He gently removed her hand from his sleeve. The time to fix this, Chloe, he said, his voice soft but utterly final, was when I was parking cars for your mother's friends. The time to say you love me was when your brother was calling me pathetic. The time to be my wife was every single day for the last 2 weeks. You can't build a bridge after the canyon has already formed. He turned and, without looking back, walked off the terrace, leaving behind the wreckage of a family, a marriage, and a world built on the most fragile foundation of all, arrogance. The string quartet, after a long, awkward silence, began to play again. But the notes of Vivaldi sounded hollow now, a funeral dirge for the fallen house of Preston. The days that followed the garden party were a slow, agonizing unraveling for the Preston family. The story of Liam's gambit spread through their social and business circles like wildfire, recounted with breathless excitement at every dinner party and board meeting. It had all the elements of a perfect drama: hubris, deception, and a spectacular public reversal of fortune. The Prestons, once the arbiters of social standing, became the objects of ridicule and pity, the very emotions they had so freely dispensed upon Liam. Richard Preston felt the consequences most acutely. The revelation that the Phoenix Project, the white whale of the city's development scene, was helmed by the son-in-law he had publicly scorned, was a professional catastrophe. Business associates who had once courted his favor now avoided his calls. His partners at his investment firm held an emergency meeting where they questioned his judgment and foresight. The man who had built his identity on the image of the infallible captain was now seen as a fool who couldn't even recognize the architect of the decade when he was sitting at his own dinner table. His booming confidence deflated, leaving behind a bitter, insecure old man, haunted by the echo of Liam's words, a lack of vision. Eleanor's world crumbled in a different, but no less devastating way. Her currency was social capital, and her account was now overdrawn. Her charity committee suddenly found her advice no longer necessary. Her friends' voices were syrupy with sympathy to her face, but she could feel their glee behind her back. She, who had orchestrated Liam's humiliation at her luncheon, was now the one being whispered about over canapes. The shame was a constant, suffocating presence. The estate, once her proud stage, now felt like a gilded prison where she was forced to relive her public downfall every day. Marcus, stripped of the protective armor of his family's reputation, was exposed as the hollow man Liam had declared him to be. His sycophantic friends distanced themselves, not wanting to be associated with the losing side. A major deal he had been boasting about mysteriously fell through, the other party citing a sudden crisis of confidence. He was left with nothing but his impotent rage, lashing out at his parents and Chloe, blaming them for the disaster, unable to face the truth that his own cruelty had been a key ingredient in their collective ruin. And then there was Chloe. Her suffering was the most complex and profound. She had lost not only a husband, but also her own self-respect. In the quiet, lonely nights in the guest room that had now become her permanent bedroom, she played the events of the last 2 weeks over and over in her mind. She saw every instance where she could have spoken up, every moment she chose silence, every time she prioritized her own comfort and her family's approval over her husband's dignity. Liam's words, "You can't build a bridge after the canyon has already formed," echoed in her head. She tried to contact him. She called, but his number was disconnected. She emailed, but the messages went unanswered. She even drove to his old office, a place she had never once visited, only to find it empty, a "for lease" sign in the window. He had vanished from her life as completely as if he had never existed, leaving behind only the gaping void of his absence. About a week after the party, a legal courier arrived at the Preston estate. He delivered a thick envelope addressed to Chloe. Inside were divorce papers, already signed by Liam. There was also a detailed financial statement, not of his assets, but of theirs. Liam had been meticulously fair. He had split their shared assets down the middle. He had even left her the house, transferring the deed entirely into her name, with the mortgage fully paid off. Attached was a simple, handwritten note on a plain white card. It was the first and only communication she received from him. "Chloe," it read, "this house was always more your dream than mine. It's yours. I have no need for it. I wish you the best in finding a foundation you can believe in. Liam." The generosity was a crueler blow than any punishment would have been. He wasn't seeking revenge. He was simply closing a chapter. He was demonstrating, one last time, the chasm between his character and her family's. She sat on the floor of their once shared living room, the divorce papers in her lap, and wept. She wasn't weeping for the loss of his money. She had only just learned the true scale of it, but for the loss of the man she had failed to see, the man she had failed to defend, the man she now realized she truly loved. Her family, lost in their own misery, offered no comfort. Her father was obsessed with the financial damage, her mother with the social disgrace. They saw Chloe's divorce as just another part of their public humiliation. In a moment of terrible clarity, she looked at her family, her angry, defeated father, her brittle, shamed mother, her petulant, lost brother, and saw them for what they were, hollow. People defined not by who they were, but by what they had. And as their status began to crumble, there was nothing left. She realized Liam hadn't just destroyed their pride, he had held up a mirror, and the reflection was unbearable. The choice she had to make was no longer between her family and Liam. He was gone. The choice was between staying in the ruins of her old life, propping up the facade of Preston pride, or walking away and trying to build something new, something real, on a foundation of her own. For the first time in her life, Chloe Preston had to decide who she was, not just whose daughter or whose wife she was supposed to be. The path to redemption, if it existed at all, would be a long and lonely one. 6 months passed. Autumn painted the city in hues of gold and crimson. The story of the Prestons' downfall had faded from a blazing headline into a cautionary tale whispered in quiet corners. Liam stood on the observation deck of the nearly completed Phoenix Plaza North Tower, the wind whipping at his coat. The city sprawled beneath him, a breathtaking tapestry of light and life. The air up here was clean and cold, and the silence was broken only by the distant hum of the metropolis. The Phoenix Project was an unqualified triumph. It was more than a collection of buildings. It was a symbol of a new way of thinking, blending visionary design with sustainable technology. Liam was no longer just a successful architect. He was a force, a name synonymous with innovation and integrity. He had achieved a level of success that would have been unimaginable to the man who had parked cars at a garden party. Yet the victory felt different than he had expected. There was no lingering anger, no gloating satisfaction. There was only a quiet, somber sense of wisdom. He had set out to teach a lesson about worth and character, and in the process, he had learned one himself. That true strength wasn't in the demolition, but in what you chose to build afterward. David Chen came to stand beside him, holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Liam. "Figured you could use the practice," David said with a wry smile. Liam laughed, a genuine, relaxed sound. "Very funny." He took a sip, the warmth spreading through him. "How are things at the old guard?" he asked, a euphemism they use for the Preston's social circle. "Richard Preston sold his firm for pennies on the dollar," David reported. "Officially, he retired. Unofficially, he was forced out. Eleanor has apparently become a recluse. And Marcus, well, Marcus is trying to rebrand himself as a venture capitalist, but no one with real money will take his calls." David paused, his expression growing more serious. "And Chloe?" Liam's smile faded. He stared out at the horizon. "She sold the house a month ago." "Did she?" David looked surprised. For a woman who couldn't bear the thought of being humiliated, that's a big step. "She didn't just sell it," Liam continued, his voice thoughtful. "According to my lawyer who handled the final transfer, she donated a significant portion of the proceeds to a foundation that provides housing for the homeless. The rest she used to go back to school. She's studying social work." David was silent for a long moment, processing this. "Wow," he finally said. "I wouldn't have predicted that." "Neither would I," Liam admitted. He hadn't seen her. He hadn't spoken to her. But he knew through the impersonal channels of lawyers and public records that she was taking the first, difficult steps toward building a new life, one completely detached from the values she had been raised with. She was, in her own way, trying to find a foundation she could believe in. He didn't know if they would ever speak again, if forgiveness was possible or even desirable. But for the first time, he felt a flicker of something like hope for her. Not for them, for her. Redemption, he realized, wasn't about being forgiven by others. It was about becoming a person you yourself could respect again. "So, what's next for you, Maestro?" David asked, changing the subject. "Another city to conquer? Another skyline to reinvent?" Liam looked down at the blueprints still clutched in his hand, the plans for the small, elegant lakeside cabin. "No," he said. "Something smaller, something for myself. A place to be quiet." He had torn down an empire of arrogance and built a new one of vision. Now it was time to build a home. A place built not on the shifting sands of status, but on the solid rock of his own hard-won peace. He had proven his worth to the world, and more importantly to himself. The past was a closed chapter, a lesson learned. The future was an open blueprint, waiting for the first line to be drawn. And so we come to the end of our story. It's a powerful reminder that true wealth is not what you have, but who you are. Arrogance and status are fragile things, easily shattered, but integrity, patience, and character are foundations that can withstand any storm. Sometimes the people we think are the weakest are simply the ones holding the most strength in reserve. What did you think of Liam's methods? Were they justified? And what about Chloe? Do you believe she deserved a second chance? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. Thank you for being here with us today. If you found value in this story, please show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel for more content just like this. Until next time, remember to value the people in your life who see you for who you truly are, not for what they think you should be.